Peter, let's look at today. Has Donald Trump gamed the media yet again? He figured out that we will not cover his rallies where he just gets up there and spouts lies, but we all show up at court where he just puts on the same show.
Yeah, look, this is his campaign, right? His campaign this year, and this is not just today, we're going to see this time and time again all year, is going to be from the courthouse steps. And, you know, look, certainly it's a more comfortable place to be for him than in 0-degree Iowa with the snow, but he can make the point to his base anyway. And the point is, I'm a victim, I'm being persecuted. Don't pay attention to the fact that the legal system has already determined that I am a fraud when it comes to valuation of my properties. The judge has already made that determination. The only question at this point is whether or not he's going to have to pay for it and how much. So, you know, he is speaking to an audience beyond the court today, and he's using the courthouse steps to be his campaign. We've never seen anything like this, of course. No presidential campaign has been conducted this way, but no president or presidential candidate has ever been charged with 91 felonies, and this isn't even one of them today. This is a civil trial. We haven't even got to the criminal cases yet.
Barbara, let's talk about the judge who originally said, nope, Trump cannot get up here and speak. And if he does, no grievances, no nonsense. The judge then changed his mind, gave him 5 minutes, and Trump got up there and did exactly what we thought he was going to do. Are there no consequences for him?
Yeah, you know, Trump is fond of saying that he gets singled out for special treatment by the courts, and that special treatment is better than anyone else would get.
So why does he get it?
He is not held. Yeah, he's not held at a higher standard. He's given special treatment. I think the judge wanted to avoid exactly this scenario. He said, if you want to present your closing argument, you can, but you have to abide by the same rules all of the lawyers abide by, referring only to the evidence, talking about the facts, talking about the law, not engaging in hyperbole or insults. And so instead, that's exactly what Trump proceeded to do. The judge indulged it to some extent when he asked the lawyers to control their client. Donald Trump just sort of ended things and stormed off in a huff. So he said what he wanted to say, and he made the points that I think will score points with his base.
So he wins the day. Why are there no consequences for him?
Well, I think Judge Engoron knows that he has the ultimate decision and the ultimate power here because he's going to decide this case. He has the ability to impose $370 million in disgorgement against Donald Trump. He has the ability to take away his ability to run businesses in New York and to force him to liquidate his properties in New York. So I think that he was willing to indulge 5 minutes of histrionics to perhaps avoid some of the same kind of things that Donald Trump has said about silencing him and muzzling him. Just go ahead, say what you want to say, and ultimately it's the judge who's going to have the last word here.
Michael, the Biden campaign is obviously watching this. Are they frustrated that Donald Trump continues to get all this attention, or are they happy because they're saying, let him put on this show, let him create this chaos and show the American people what he is and what he's offering them?
The case that the Biden campaign really wants to prosecute against Donald Trump is not in a court of law. It is on the campaign trail. You've seen that very clearly from how President Biden has started his year, 2024. I was with him near Valley Forge, Pennsylvania last week when he delivered that blistering attack on President Trump as a threat to our democracy, following it up with that trip to South Carolina this week, talking about the threat of political violence that we still face in this country because of the climate of violence that Donald Trump, frankly, has stoked during his time in office and in the public square. The view of the campaign is that, listen, there is a job for state, local, federal prosecutors to make the case against Donald Trump in all of these various cases that he's facing. Their job is to beat him at the ballot box, and they think, frankly, we should be doing more to focus on the kinds of things Donald Trump is proposing to do if he were given 4 more years in the White House. They think that's what's more effective also with those swing voters that are so important. And Steph, it's obviously a stark contrast to what Donald Trump wants to do, obviously focusing on the courtroom. The way that the Biden team has handled, obviously, what we saw and what I was covering outside the federal courthouse today here in L.A., the White House keeping very much an arm's length from what the case and the prosecutors are obviously doing. The firewall between the Justice Department is very solid, but also between the legal strategy of Abbe Lowell on the part of Hunter Biden. He's pursuing a very aggressive strategy and one that some White House advisors and political aides would rather not see happening at this point.
Peter, well, the former president is changing his messaging slightly. I want to play something he said last night.
I'm not going to have time for retribution. Remember this, our ultimate retribution is success.
I'm sorry, where did he get that line? Because I have seen fundraising emails. We've seen him at the podium specifically say it is all about retribution. He's promised it at rallies. Why is he changing his tune?
He has promised it at rallies. He promised it just hours earlier in one of those fundraising emails you mentioned. It literally came out just a few hours before that comment in which it said in all caps, "I am your retribution." So I wouldn't take too much. I wouldn't take what he said last night to be the final word on it. He just seemed to be basically reacting to criticism of him for saying it, but that doesn't mean he doesn't actually still think it. It doesn't mean he won't actually continue to use that line. You know, Donald Trump says what he says in any given moment, and the consistency has never been his, number one priority. He also said last night, "I'm not going to be a dictator," after having said, "I'm going to be a dictator, but only on day one in order to do a couple of things, and then I'll stop being a dictator." And last night he assured everybody he doesn't plan to be a dictator. He's all over the place. He likes to say what he likes to say at any given moment. But I think that what's most important is to understand what he has said most consistently. What he has said most consistently is retribution, and that he doesn't care for the rules that have bound other presidents. Remember, he's the guy who said he was for termination of the Constitution in order to remove Biden from office right away and put Trump back in without bothering to wait for another election. That's not something, obviously, we've seen in our history, but he's out there leaning into that. It doesn't seem to bother him that it goes against all of the traditions and norms of our society. He said it. He hasn't taken it back. And that's where he's going with this campaign, and it seems to be working for him in the Republican primary.
Barb, the former president has had a lot to say about New York AG Tish James and her fraud case against him, but there was one specific point that I want to highlight.
She did this to Exxon, and they drove Exxon out of New York. Exxon paid billions of dollars of taxes. They're now living in Texas. Exxon is very happy in Texas. Other companies, because of what's happening here, are going to be moving out of New York also.
Tish James drove Exxon out of New York. For fact's sake, Exxon left New York in 1989 when Tish James was working at the Legal Aid Society. And how he continues to say this is about election interference. Tish James opened this investigation in 2019, long before this election. All of this is nonsense. But what impact do these lies that he's pushing have on the justice system when you've got a defendant just pushing these kind of things?
Yeah, so ordinarily in a civil or a criminal case, a lawyer in closing argument would be barred from making that kind of an argument. The motivation or the history of the prosecutor is of absolutely no relevance in deciding whether this defendant is liable for the claims that are asserted in the complaint against him, period. So to bring in all of this other stuff has nothing to do with this case. And Donald Trump may or may not know that. That's why the judge didn't want him to speak out. But it does smear the attorney general in the eyes of the public. The public is less likely to fact check than you are. Someone will hear that and believe it to be true and think of Tish James as someone who is out to get business and out to get middle America. And so Donald Trump gets away with these kinds of things by saying things that are false, knowing that very few people will follow up on them. That's why it's great that you, Stephanie, make sure to correct the record.
1989. All right, Mr. Memoli, let's talk about why you are in California. Hunter Biden, this tax case, as well as the House GOP probe, they are both moving forward just as the election is getting underway. What is the Biden campaign strategy around this?
Well, we saw that split really on display in the past 24 hours when the Biden campaign and from the White House podium, Karine Jean-Pierre, the press secretary, kept referring to Hunter Biden as a private citizen, saying this was not something they were going to be commenting on. But we saw the very emotional response of the First Lady of the United States talking about how she views this as a mother and as a grandmother and the cruelty she believes Republicans are showing in their attempts to besmirch him and, by extension, her husband through this process. But what is also of note was what we saw in the courtroom today, Stephanie, because we thought this would be a rather routine hearing. Nothing routine, of course, about the son of the sitting president facing federal charges. This is the second separate indictment that he's now potentially dealing with a trial in the coming months. But as part of a back and forth between the Justice Department, the prosecutors in this case, and Abbe Lowell, we saw that Abbe Lowell made it very clear that the evidence and the motions that he plans to introduce in the coming weeks ahead of that June trial are all about why this plea deal fell apart in the first place. Remember, the Republicans accusing the U.S. Attorney David Weiss of a sweetheart deal here in that plea agreement, which did fall apart in a Delaware courtroom. And that is what Abbe Lowell now wants to put on trial. He wants to introduce and seek documents about how that fell apart, why that Republican pressure may have led to this trial. You mentioned June 20th, the earliest that this trial date can occur. Stephanie, that's a month before the Republican convention, 2 months before the Democratic convention. Quite the split screen that we are going to be facing, not just with the former president and his trials, but also potentially the president's son.